welcome to the July 25th, 2023 Yakima School District Board meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to remind our audience we do have interpretation services from Nate with Language Connection. If you are in person tonight and need translation services, we have devices you can use. Please check in with Liz over here. We also offer live streaming options for this meeting. You can find the link on our webpage under Find It Fast, or going directly to the ysd.org /board meetings. Public comment, there are always two options for public comment. The first option is for comment on agenda items only, and the second option toward the end of the meeting is for all other topics. There are two documents to sign if you would like to speak tonight. There's a sign-in form and a copy of the guidelines, and those are available at the table in the back. If you are interested in any past meetings, you can find a link on our webpage to the YSD YouTube channel to view past meetings that were recorded and posted there. Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Here.
Director Navarro Jr.?
Here.
Director Rice?
Here.
Vice President Villanueva?
Here.
President Walker?
Here. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to honor the memory of my dear friend and colleague, John Kaluzny, who passed away Monday, I believe. John was a longtime counselor at McClure Elementary School, deeply beloved by his students and staff, a person of great energy, and we will miss him dearly. Please take a moment to honor John's memory. Thank you. There is a copy of his obituary on the district website. You can also download it from the Yakima Herald website. I skipped somehow on my computer thing, skipped the Pledge of Allegiance and the land acknowledgement. Director Navarro, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I believe we have the recorded land acknowledgement.
Today, the schools of the Yakima School District rest on the ancestral lands of the 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation.
The people of the Yakima Nation inhabited more than 12 million acres.
Across Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Franklin, Grant, Kittitas, Cliticat, and Yakima counties.
Today we honor the Native people who are tied to the land through history, legends, and cultures.
We acknowledge their descendants who live in the world today.
We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to live here since time immemorial.
An acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way to show respect.
Any step toward correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture.
It also honors the truth.
As a school district, we will continue to build upon our relations with the Yakima Nation.
And thanks again to our students. It's always nice to hear student voices, especially in the middle of the summer. Okay, now we have members of the board. Do we have any updates for members of the board?
Just a reminder to board members, the WASDA Legislative Committee has finalized its work in preparation for General Assembly, and that document for General Assembly should be out to us electronically by the end of August. So we'll have a few weeks to review it, and I would hope that we could, at some point in early September, maybe, put it on the agenda for discussion about priority issues for our board.
Sure.
Okay?
Any other reports from members of the board?
I do have. As the board is aware, I attended the NALEO annual conference, and it was a good conference. I was glad that I was able to attend. I just wanted to share a few highlights. The workshops, there's 3 workshops that I found particularly interesting. The first one was how COVID-19 affected students and families, and just the extent of that, just to get to hear from other school districts across the country was very interesting. And some of the things that they're doing, very similar to what the Yakima School District is doing, so I was glad to hear, to learn about that. Also, another one of the issues within the Latino community is the opioid and the fentanyl crisis in schools. So I don't know if in the Yakima School District we've had those discussions, but it appears to be a serious problem across the country. A lot of students are overdosing unintentionally or intentionally, but so this seems to be probably, a bigger problem than I had imagined. So that was a good workshop that I attended. The third workshop that I found the most interesting was a discussion on racism in America. And the reason why I found it very, very interesting is, the national discourse has been on racism, discrimination, on equity, systemic racism, and so forth, it's just a good topic, good discussion. But it appears that the Latino community is now looking within and examining those issues of racism, of discrimination, of exclusionary practices, which seem to be prevalent. And from the discussions that I was part of, I was able to go back to my younger days, right, growing up, and just remembering the racism, the discrimination, exclusionary practices that my community, the Mexican American community in Los Angeles, here in the Yakima Valley, that I experienced, right? It appears, and I recall, and there was a discussion that there was the term of colorism that I don't know if I've ever really studied that or really heard that, but it appears that we have a system, a stratification, right, where if a person is more light-complected, blue-eyed, green eyes, light hair, and perhaps aligns or identifies more with their Spanish. So apparently we're all mestizos, right, the Latino population, Spanish and indigenous population from Mexico. So if a person aligns or identifies more with the Spanish culture, then in the stratification, they're considered to be a little higher, right? More privileges, more higher social economic status, and so forth and so on, better treatment. And at the bottom, you have Afro-Latino community, and then I believe right above that would be indigenous populations. And so that was an eye-opener for me, that one is that within the Latino community, we've been ignoring that, kind of have a blind eye to that, just thinking, and this is just me thinking, because this is something that's really interesting to me, and that, how can we as Latinos be racist, right, if we're all mestizos or we come from indigenous roots, right? How can we do that? But in actuality, I've seen racism and discrimination and exclusionary practices within our culture. So it's just making me wonder about all the work that we've been doing as a board, the group studies, the book studies, our policies, and just how that that thinking, that focus may impact how I look at our policies and equity going forward, because it is a good thing that it's being discussed at the national level, because it's something that we really need to deal with within the Latino culture, community. So it makes me wonder, and I'll just leave it with this last comment. I'm just wondering if racism, discrimination is just a human being problem, right? Not a specific group or individuals. So, but anyways, that's my question for myself, right? That I've been struggling flying from New York City to back home, trying to think about that. But thank you to the board for allowing me that to attend that conference. It was a very valuable conference, and I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Raymond, do you have materials from those workshops that you can share with the rest of us?
I don't. It was more of a discussion. Yeah. And yeah, they didn't provide any materials. I'll check to make sure, but I didn't see any materials.
Sometimes they'll post the materials, like
Yes.
on the website after the conference is
Yes.
over.
Yeah, I do have access to materials that are related to the COVID-19 and how it impacted students and families. And what was interesting, there was a gentleman who's a principal in San Diego, Garden Grove, California, and he was talking about PBIS and how it may or may not be effective for all students. So he said his theory is that 10% of the students that come in with if you come in with more than 4, what's the word?
ACEs.
ACEs, correct, then PBIS may not be the right model for those students. So, good stuff, but I can share that information with you guys.
I'd appreciate that,
Okay,
thank you.
sure.
Thank you for your report, and thank you for representing us at that conference. Any other reports from the board? Well, Martha and I did the second of a pilot. We're participating in a pilot from the Washington School Directors Association trainings, the required trainings that are coming out. So we kind of get a first look, and then we get credit for it, so we don't have to take that training later. But we're talking about some of those issues, and it's kind of moved away a little bit, the focus from race, but about culture and belonging, and creating a culture of belonging in our schools. And I think race is still significantly a part of that issue. But there are other factors in creating an atmosphere of belonging in a school. And so the training that will come down for school board members around the state later, we help to kind of pilot some of that, and it's shaping up to be, I think it's going to be a useful training.
I would agree. It really causes you to think about culture and environmental culture, the culture of the group that you identify with or the group that you work with or things like that. And it was abbreviated because this is just a pilot, but it was good.
Yeah.
And I would encourage all of us to be a part of that when those trainings become available.
And when they do, there will be live trainings and online trainings, so you can approach them either way. So, anything else from the board? Okay, moving on. We have Deputy Superintendent Stacy Locke with us this evening in our superintendent's absence, and she will provide an update for us.
Thank you very much, President Walker. So the character word of the month, let Liz get it up there. There you go, thank you. The July's character word of the month is enterprising, marked by an independent, energetic spirit and by a readiness to act, having or showing initiative and resourcefulness. Thank you, Liz. I also have to report on the Yakima Valley Farm Workers a Clinic Dental Program that serves the Yakima School District. They provide a fully equipped mobile dental unit that deploys to buildings throughout YSD. We had 5,586 elementary and middle school students receive a service. either a screening, education, sealants, or referrals this year, which is an increase of over 5% from last year. And when we look at those 5,586 students that were assessed, 4,237 received fluoride treatments, 2,319 received oral hygiene instruction, 693 received sealant treatments, and we had 17 buildings that were served. Of note is that 67 students were identified as having urgent needs, and so that would have likely went unnoticed had the mobile clinic not visited them. So just to let you know what's happening through Howie and the work that they're doing. I'd also like to report that Lieutenant Janice, who has been working hand in hand with the Handle with Care program, which is the domestic violence prevention program, recently won a national award, the Gary P. Hayes Awards, from the Police Executive Research Forum back in New York. So the work that we are doing in our district with Handle with Care and with YPD is being recognized nationally now. And so a lot of recognition for a lot of hard work from Lieutenant Janice and Sarah Cordova. Also, I'll ask Assistant Superintendent Rodriguez to kind of fill in on the PLC Institute that we sent 200 people to last week in Seattle. This is the second year of our participation over there. And Jenny, would you like to follow up with some comments?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Superintendent Locke. We had actually about 240 staff that attended the PLC's Professional Learning Communities Institute in Seattle. It's offered through Solution Tree, which is one of our partners along with WASA, the State School Administrators Association, as part of our 3-year cohort of learning. There were about 1,700 participants from a variety of locations, including Canada. So it was an international conference. Fantastic conference. Every single principal except for one who had a medical issue was in attendance with their teams from their building. So every school in our district took a team. And in particular this year, we prioritized making sure that assistant principals could attend, counselors could attend, and we also invited every teacher who had just finished their first year in Yakima School District as a way to further their learning and their mentoring. So really a fantastic conference, and each of the teams as part of the conference had an opportunity to talk together about their learning and plan for some turnkey training at their sites. So when we have in August coming up our state and district PD days, one of those days is really dedicated to having those teams share back with their entire certificated teaching staff team the learning that they brought back from the conference. So it was really a fantastic event.
Thank you, Jenny. That's all I have, President Walker.
Thank you, Jenny. That's exciting news. The makeup of that delegation is really exciting to me to hear that every school was there, that counselors were there too, and that first-year teachers. I think that what a great idea. Okay, next up we have Dr. Rodriguez again. We had some questions last time from the board about curriculum adoption, and I believe you have a more detailed presentation around the process of curriculum adoption. So, Dr. Rodriguez.
Sure. Thank you, Board President Walker, members of the board. So I understand there were some additional questions expressed. And so I wanted to make sure that we address those, and maybe some things that you might like to know that you didn't even know you wanted to know. So we have a fairly comprehensive report this evening, but I promise it will be quicker and painless, less painful than you maybe thought when you saw the length of the slides for this evening. So, right? I know we have a lot of important things tonight. So with my teaching and learning hat, which you all know is the hat that I wear in our organization, by the end of this report, I would hope as a board member that you could explain why high quality curriculum is a necessity for teacher effectiveness and equitable learning. Be able to, at a very high level, describe the instructional materials evaluation tool, which you'll hear me refer to as the IMET, and the OSPI, our state superintendent screening for biased content and instructional materials resource. understand how aligned materials embody the shifts inherent in the Common Core state standards. I promise we'll keep this at a 50,000-foot level for you, and explain the process district staff utilize to select adopted materials. It is a significant investment in resources. As you know, you approved approximately a $5 million purchase for these materials. So I can imagine that you may get questions about what is that money for and how is it being utilized and how did we select what we selected. It's not clicking. It clicked a minute ago.
There you go.
Okay, well, you may have to click for me. Okay. You're familiar by now with this graphic around our district strategies to achieve high quality teaching and learning. Our 3 levers, as often they're referred to, professional learning communities being the first one, and as well as induction, mentoring, coaching, and principal supervision. I'm just going to pause, Liz, when I need you to click. Okay. So I'm just highlighting for you here, cross-cutting across all 3 of these levers is a professional tools, which include a high-quality standards-aligned curriculum maps, and standards-based unit design. So when we're talking about curriculum adoption, it is really a professional tool for our professional educators to achieve all 3 of these levers for student outcomes. There is significant amounts of research on instructional materials, and I've given you just some of the key findings from research, but if you're interested in looking at any of the studies, I'm happy to get more information for you. But what we know is that the choice of materials, it has a really significant impact on student learning, comparable to the difference in having a mediocre teacher to having a high quality teacher. And really why that happens is because the topics that are presented and the order in which they're presented and the pedagogical approach that's attached to them is often laid out in those materials. So when you have really high quality materials, that influences what teachers choose to teach, the order they choose to teach it in, how much time they spend on something, how they assess it, and ultimately, how students are going to do long term. There is also an incredible amount of research on the importance of early literacy proficiency, tons of studies that show, right, students that are on grade level in first grade, they continue to do well by 3rd grade. Students that are readers, proficient readers by 3rd grade are able to proceed through beyond grade level, starting high school in 9th grade. They graduate at higher rates. They attend college at higher rates. They tend to be successful at higher rates. And the converse is true. We know really what that pipeline looks like for students who do not become proficient readers by the end of 3rd grade. So having materials that ensure that literacy is happening in a way that is explicit and intentional and designed to make sure students are successful readers by the end of 3rd grade is critical. On grade level work is also really important. And there's a number of studies out there that show when we don't have tightly aligned materials that often teachers are spending a significant amount of time designing things rather than focusing on feedback for students, which is where the learning happens. We also know from studies of things like Teachers Pay Teachers, which you may have heard of. It's this amazing online resource where you can go and say, I'd like a lesson about butterflies, and it gives you a lesson. The challenge is that nearly 70% of those resources actually don't align to the standards that they say they're aligned to and are often below the grade level for which they're assigned. So when you have staff having to make up their own mind and pick and choose and invest a lot of time, often they don't have the opportunity to really ensure that it is aligned to the right standards at the right grade level for rigor for students. Truly having a guaranteed and viable curriculum, it is a variable most strongly related to student achievement. It is an equity issue, and so we have worked really hard across our system and our organization to ensure that we will have a guaranteed and viable curriculum for every student, regardless of their teacher assignment, regardless of the boundary of the school that they live in. Our staff, our teachers, our instructional coaches, our principals have invested a lot of time to really identify what is the most important learning. And we had huge teams of folks that really made sure that this selection of curriculum was going to do the job of getting folks there. We do have a couple of OPs with which you are likely familiar, but they lay out the adoption process. It specifically calls out that we are to consider equity, student demographics, student voice, evidence-based practices, and bias. In addition, we asked our staff committees that were involved in this process this year, what else should we consider? And they wanted us to also take a look at technology, its integration with the materials, how easy it was to access, the experience for students, the experience for teachers, the learning intentions and success criteria and how those were posed for staff, and ensuring, particularly at the elementary level, that writing was embedded and not a standalone. This is just a quick overview for you of the process that we go through. We do an initial call out for committee members. And in that, we look to have representatives from every single school, from every single grade level, to have folks from both our bilingual classrooms, our English classrooms, our special education classrooms, it's school administrators. So it is a really broad-based team to ensure that we have representation of all those voices at the table. We also put out a request for proposals. The RFP process was required this past year because we were utilizing ESSER funds to do this. And because they're federal dollars, there are specific rules about how we procure our options and how we select those. We did a significant amount of professional development with those teams to make sure they were grounded in research. And in particular, we spent a lot of time talking about setting aside personal bias and preference. As someone who has maybe been a more experienced teacher, they might be interested in a certain type of activities or a certain teaching style. But when we adopt curriculum as a district, we have to make sure it's going to meet the needs not just of an experienced teacher, but also a brand new teacher and everything in between. The team identified criteria important to include, which I shared with you just a moment ago. And then we had subcommittees that reviewed materials to narrow it down to a full review. The full review of a set of curricular materials involves the IMET tool that we talked about a little bit ago. I'm going to share more about what's in that. It takes 1 to 2 full days per curriculum program to do that process. We had a team assigned for every grade level. And at elementary, we had both an English team and a Spanish language arts team for kinder, first, and second grade. We also had a team for preschool. We also work through the OSPI bias screener in that process, and the team identifies the strengths and weaknesses of each set of materials by grade level and then reaches a consensus decision. On the right, you can see the graphics for Ed Reports, New Mexico, Louisiana Believes, Colorado Department of Ed. These are some folks that do additional reviews of curriculum materials aside from, of course, the curriculum vendors who believe they meet all of the requirements. And so we utilize those, and the subcommittees utilize those to help narrow down some of our choices based on independent reviews that had been conducted. As I think I've shared before, but
Excuse me,
Sure.
what does IMET stand for?
Instructional Materials Evaluation Tool.
Thank you.
Our elementary committee was 31 members, secondary was 26, and I've already kind of shared with you all the hats of people that are on that committee to make sure that we're really thinking across the broad spectrum of our system as we go through that work. Here's just a quick snapshot of the elementary team's schedule. So you can see, again, this is a significant time commitment for our staff. Huge thank you to them for all the time. You can see on here several dates in February. That was the intersession week. So this was a group of teachers who said, I'm not going to take the week off. I'm going to come and work and read through tons of curriculum for a week. And you'll see on the next slide, very similar schedule for our secondary, who gave up part of their winter break to do this work last year. These are the vendors that did submit proposals. So again, under that RFP process, we can't just go out and say we'd like to adopt product X. They have to actually submit a proposal aligned to what we're looking for and be able to demonstrate that they meet those requirements. So you can see here we had 5 different publishers that submitted. Some submitted for elementary and secondary. College Board only submitted for secondary. So these were the choices that subcommittee did an initial review on to narrow down. The IMET tool, this is one of our, again, learning outcomes for us this evening, is just for you to understand what this tool is. It was developed by Achieve the Core, which is Student Achievement Partners, as well as the Council of Chief State School Officers. They all worked together to develop this IMET tool to have something that was outside of really vendors and publishers, that could be a way to really demonstrate the strength of instructional materials. And the criteria that they lay out is really about looking for alignment to the Common Core state standards, which are our adopted standards in the state of Washington. There's a focus on the Common Core shifts, which I'm going to talk to in just a moment. There's 4 non-negotiables, and I've put the abbreviation NN there so that when you see that on the scoring sheets, you know that's what it's talking about, as well as 4 alignment criteria, which you'll see designated AC. And there are 2 versions of the IMET tool. There is a version for kindergarten through 2nd grade because there is a heavy emphasis around foundational skills of literacy. Again, because we are having that target of ensuring students are proficient readers by 3rd grade. And then there is a separate IMET tool for 3rd through 12th grade. The IMET is also for English language arts and mathematics. So Common Core shifts in language arts. This is probably more than you need to know, but what the key points are is it's complex texts. We expect students to be accessing complex texts. They need to be using evidence from the text, both literary evidence and informational text evidence, in how they read, write, speak, and listen. And we want them to be building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. So as we reviewed, those are 3 things that we are really critically looking for in the materials. Non-negotiable 1 is around that high quality text, and it talks about anchor text, but these are texts that we would spend a significant amount of time on in a classroom. So we want them to be worthy of students' time and attention. We want them to be of quality and have rich academic language. We're not just picking something at random. It's really about the complexity of the text, and there are factors under this quantitative, qualitative, and reader and task component that are all weighed and considered. There's 2 specific metrics that measure this non-negotiable 1. Non-negotiable 2 is evidence-based discussion and writing. Again, there are 2 metrics in this, but we're looking for opportunities for rich and rigorous evidence-based discussions, and also written response from students in order to build literacy skills. Non-negotiable 3 is around building knowledge. We want to be doing that systematically, again, not at random or just based on what I'm interested in maybe as the teacher. And again, through reading, writing, speaking, and listening and language study. I put my favorite baseball team up here. I don't know why they do this thing now where they stick their feet in the middle and hop around. If you are watching the Mariners, you've seen this, but there is a rather famous study called the baseball study. And I've given you just a little graphic here, and I don't think this will be a huge surprise, but what they found is when students had high knowledge about a topic, even when they had lower reading ability, they were able to comprehend. So imagine a student in the 3rd grade, for example, who loves baseball and knows all kinds of things about baseball and plays Little League and knows stats and watches the game on the weekend with his family. They read an article about baseball, even if they're a struggling reader, they will be able to comprehend and pick up what we're asking them to pick up from that reading, versus somebody who does not have that level of knowledge. And what this drives us to look for in curriculum is that we want to be systematically and intentionally building background knowledge for students around a wide range of topics, because as they get into higher grade levels and the reading texts become more and more complex, if they have that schema, they have that background, or I like to think of it as like a closet organizer, they have a place to hang that new information. They will be stronger students and more successful with new content. So that is, again, part of this IMET tool that we're looking for. Non-negotiable 4, and this is the piece that is in that kinder, first and second grade, is around foundational skills. You've seen this graphic before when Executive Director Erin Chaplin has presented with you, but these are really the simple view of reading comprehension. So there are 5 separate metrics that really break down these foundational skills, which need to be taught explicitly. There's very few students who just magically learn to read. The majority of students need explicit instruction in the components you see here in order to become proficient readers. The alignment criteria, I've just given you a quick snapshot of that, but we're looking at distribution of text types and genres. There's 5 different metrics for that. We have 3 metrics that really focus on how the questioning happens and the use of textual evidence and building academic language. There are 3 metrics really specifically tied to written tasks, and there are 4 metrics tied to explicit systematic instruction and diagnostic support, again, in those really foundational reading skills. So that's the IMET in a snapshot, right? So what I would want you to know is we're really looking for these components that we know will help students be able to become proficient readers, writers, speakers, and listeners. And it's based on their research around what we know is going to work and also tightly aligned to the standards which have been adopted by our state. The other tool that we spend significant time working through is the OSPI bias screener. And we do have law in our state that requires screening criteria to identify and eliminate bias in any instructional materials. That is in our policy here as well, our OPs. And what we know is that we really want to look for materials that both reflect our students back to them in a positive way, their cultural history, their history, their racial background, their linguistic characteristics. And we also want windows that are a way for students to look into other cultures, again, in a positive way to build and stretch those connections and relationships. Again, that bias screener is comprehensive. So I've just given you the sections of that screener and how many metrics fall in. So for example, variety of roles and character traits, there's 9 different metrics that the team is looking for in terms of representation within materials. And you can see all of the other items that are listed here as well. And so now we're going to go very quickly through the scoring, but I wanted to share with you the scores from the teams. So this first one is the IMET scores on foundational skills. HMH is Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, which is La Lectura and Into Reading. So that was one program we were looking at. Amplify is the other vendor that was selected for full review. The Spanish materials are titled Caminos, and CKLA, Core Knowledge and Language Arts, is the English version. Again, we had a team of teachers at every grade level, and then they go through all of those metrics that I just walked you through, and they score them. And then there's a total score at the end. There's also a section of what we call red flags, things that are really critical and important to the efficacy of the materials. And so we look for those specifically. And you can see that HMH, our teams identified 8 of the 11 listed red flags, and in Amplify there were 0 of the red flags, which is a good thing, which is why it's in green and not red. Here you have the HMH Spanish materials. This is again the non-negotiables, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which again, remember, non-negotiable 4 is foundational skills. That's why it stops at 2nd grade. And then you have the alignment criteria that we just walked through, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you wanted to know, did this specific at a grade level do this thing, you could crosswalk those negotiables and alignment criteria to the grade level and find out whether it met or not met. So there is a lot of green, which is great, but you can see there's also several not met items that would be of concern. This is also Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. This is the English version, and we actually see that there were more grade levels and more non-negotiables and alignment criteria that were not met in these materials. Amplify, which is the program that we selected, our team selected, and that you approved. You can see here there were only 3, 1 item at kinder and 2 at 1st grade. Everything else met. And in the English version of Amplify, there was only 1 item that was not met. We also conducted the bias screener. So again, here you can see the HMH, the Houghton Mifflin Harcourt is the La Lectura and the Inter-Reading. And then at the bottom 2 rows, you can see Amplify Caminos and CKLA. So you can see grade level by grade level whether they passed really that OSPI screening. So when we look at this, we can see that for the English materials, really quite strong as we looked at that bias screener, but for the Spanish materials, there are some things we will pay attention to and have to talk about with our teachers as they're implementing them. And then this takes us to the secondary. Again, non-negotiables 1, 2, and 3. There is no non-negotiable 4 here because again, that's foundational skills, kinder, 1st, and 2nd grade. CB is for College Board, and Springboard is the name of that program. And then you can see Savas. So those are the 2 different publishers that we selected for full review that the subcommittee selected. And then again by grade level, and you can see actually they both did quite well with the non-negotiables. There was just non-negotiable 2 concern at the 8th grade level. And then here you can see again the College Board and the Savas for the alignment criteria. And what we're looking for is we're looking for a score of 4 out of 6 or higher. So you can see, I'm just going to walk you through that alignment criteria 1. If it's a 4 or 5, it's in yellow because it does pass, but it's just barely passing. We really want the best. So the things in green are like they got full credit. They got everything checked off and did really well. Again, Savas is the one that was selected by the committee and that you approved. So you can see where there's some pinks, some reds that were not met. That is not the program that we selected. The bias screener for middle school and high school, we did it in a little bit different format. It was really more qualitative in nature. So the teams really shared out and had dialogue around strengths and concerns or considerations, which is super helpful as we continue to roll this out and have conversations and training with our teachers. So you just have that summary and a summary of the high school strengths and concerns or considerations, again, for both of the 2 that we did a full review on. You've seen this picture, but I love their smiling faces on here. So this was our elementary and preschool team. And again, over 1,200 staff hours that these folks put in. That doesn't include teaching and learning. So Mrs. Chaplin's or mine or our team's time, but that's just the teacher's time. And they unanimously selected Amplify, CKLA, and Caminos based on all of that scoring that you just saw. This is what the structure looks like. And again, happy to get you any more details that you might like, but this is just to give you a quick example of what a pacing guide might look like. So it lays out the knowledge unit, the skills unit, how many days, all of that is kind of laid out for teachers, and we can see that it indeed fits within our 180-day school year. There is really no fluff. This is not an anthology where teachers pick and choose and say, today I'll have the hamburger and the French fries, and tomorrow, I'm going to order the tacos. Like it is a set menu. As my parents would say, you get what you get. You don't throw a fit a little bit, like you eat what's on your plate. So this is what's on the plate. It is very tightly aligned to our state standards. We have done the work of going through, our teachers have done the work of identifying where the guaranteed standards that they believe are the most important things for students to know and be able to do, that they align to these units of study. Kinder through 2nd grade, it's designed for 120 minutes per day. We give them like 125 because we wanted to make sure they had the time to implement this the way that it's designed. 3rd through 5th grade, it is 90 minutes per day, again, because of that foundational skills piece is a little bit different. They think it's really funny. They have PP days, their pause points days. I would think they could have come up with maybe a different acronym, but those are built in, and you can see those kind of laid out in that pacing guide chart, which again is providing time for teachers really in their professional learning teams to say, students need a little more time with this particular standard, or I'd like to re-give the assessment after I reteach it. So those days are built into the units. They're not an add-on or an extra that we don't really have time for. So it's really wonderful to have those built in there. This year, we really are going to be following the publisher recommendations for pacing. That was a decision of a team with representatives from every elementary school because we're learning the materials. And so at the end of the year, we really will have a good idea of, did things take longer? Did they take less time? Where did kids struggle? And we'll be able to adjust from there. Similarly, in our middle school and high school secondary group, over 780 teacher hours. And again, it was a unanimous vote of the team, again, based on the IMET and the bias screener scoring and all the time that was spent digging into those materials. I know this is too small for you, but our teachers have access to this electronically already. They were able to get that in June. So those that wanted to get a jump start could start taking a look at it. At the middle level, there are 5 units in the materials. At the high school, there are 6. The decision of both committees was to stick to really 1 unit per quarter. So both our middles and high schools will be doing 4 units. And those teacher teams across all of our buildings give input into which units they thought were the most important for our students. We did, of course, look at where those guaranteed standards were aligned as well to help us make that decision and what order they're in. And this is where the equity piece comes in because whether I'm going to Lewis and Clark Middle School or I'm going to Franklin Middle School, we're doing the same units of study in the same order on approximately the same time. So if my family moves, I can just jump right in and not miss anything important. This is just an example of that scope and sequence. So you can see units and how guaranteed standards fit in there. And then the last thing I have for you is just some fast facts that I thought might be helpful for you to answer questions you might get from community members. So why did we pursue this adoption? The last one was over a decade ago. And like all things, curricular materials evolve and get better over time as people use them and discover ways to improve them. Additionally, with our targeted and intentional focus on professional learning communities, having this guaranteed and viable curriculum in place, it's a critical building block of having a strong professional learning community across our district. The adoption impacts our students kindergarten through 12th grade. We did a review of preschool materials. We found that they did not suffice. They did not meet enough of the criteria. And so we said, we're going to have to go back and call for additional materials and take a look at them before we would purchase them. And the desired or anticipated outcomes really are that we would meet or exceed our district strategic improvement goals in specifically the area of language arts. Our plan is to utilize these materials for 7 years. We implemented a 7-year curriculum review and adoption cycle last year. The current materials that you approved, they are paid for through 2030. Makes me feel really old to say that. And that, of course, depends on maintaining the review and adoption cycle based on the fiscal outlook of the district. So it could be sooner or it could be longer depending on that. How many curriculum committees or groups offered input? I am hopeful that you're seeing that this is there's a rather technical nature to this work. And so we had multiple meetings with the committees. It was a huge time commitment for people to be a part of that process. They did share information back at their buildings after every meeting and gather feedback. We also publicized the work through district staff communications and held materials review open houses per our OP that we have in this district for anyone interested in reviewing them prior to the board approval. And finally, how does this adoption align with the district's long-term plans? High quality materials and aligned scope and sequence are absolutely necessary for us to have equitable access and outcomes for our students. So they're tightly aligned to our district goals, particularly number 3 and number 5. And hopefully that wasn't too painful. And hopefully you learned some things about how we adopt curriculum here in Yakima. With that, thank you for the time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions from the board?
I do have a quick question in regards to the pace. Was it the pacing guide? So as we know, many of our students are lagging behind 1 or 2 or 3 grades. So how does that work with the pacing guide? Are they receiving that grade level content, and then at the same time, whatever they're lagging in, or they do one, then go into the other? How does that all work with the pacing guide?
What we know from research is if we don't provide them on grade level, they will never catch up. In fact, they tend to just get further and further behind if we try to play the catch-up game. So the intent is really that all students have access to that grade level content and learning. And then while we're doing that, this is where the power of our professional learning teams really lies, is to have those conversations as they're even planning around where might students struggle, what prerequisite skills might we need to embed into this teaching for students so that they can be successful at that grade level. We also have embedded, particularly at our elementary level, we have an intervention block. So that's a place where students are also able to pick up some of those skills and content that they may have missed previously. So it is really critical that we adhere to the time at grade level, but that we also are supporting students at the same time with things that they might need to be working on.
I have one question. In the red and green scoring charts, how do we manage to provide to students those, for instance, a non-negotiable that is not included for that grade level?
Mm-hmm. It's really, again, part of the work of both the district team, but also the professional learning teams at the building for the teachers. So part of our goal in rolling out the materials is making teacher teams aware where there may be something that needs to be supplemented and providing potential resources for them to do so. In some cases, particularly with language arts, what's not shown in there is all the novels, but that is part of it. So sometimes, for example, like in the bias screener, we might say there's not enough representation of our students. And so then we have a list of novels we could have purchased as part of the curriculum, but we specifically target to purchase a novel that meets that need. So it is kind of a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle, putting all the pieces together, but that's how we focus on doing that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a question, but really just want to thank you for your presentation. It is such a detailed process, and I really appreciate the number of staff that were involved. Those are the folks who have the academic training and certainly the hands-on experience, boots on the ground, if you will, experience working with our students and really understand the needs of our students. And so I'm really grateful for this very thorough process that kind of takes all of the guesswork out of it, and it looks like there was a lot of really great structured matrices that really are focusing on what's best for kids, and so I really appreciate the thoroughness of this process. And although in Washington State, the school board is responsible for curriculum, I think this board's wisely delegated that responsibility to the superintendent, and everything that you showed us really just affirms that that decision really is the right one. Yeah, so thank you so much for this presentation. It was very helpful and really eye-opening to understand how in-depth and detailed this work is. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would be remiss if I didn't really give credit to Erin Chaplin, who's in the audience today. This is really her leadership that led this work, and yes, amazing teachers that were a part of it, so thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a couple, actually, if I can. In the beginning, you mentioned and I don't know if I'm getting the language right here, but the shifts or the updates in the Common Core state standards as they come out. How often do those shifts or updates come down? Is that an annual thing, or is it once every 5 or 10 years something changes? Yeah. Or is there no rhyme or reason to it?
It is not an annual thing. Those were shifts when we really shifted from our state standards to the Common Core standards. So those have been out for a while, but I would say that it's taken publisher companies a little bit of time to make that adjustment. So when we adopted our previous set of materials, that was right around the same time, but most publishers weren't super familiar with the standards yet. And so now the materials really are tightly aligned to those shifts and the standards that have come down. So not frequently.
The reason I was asking is based on the 7-year purchase what risk do we have of something else changing in the meantime, which I know is probably impossible to predict, but I have not been through that before, so I was kind of curious.
Excuse me, Ryan, I think there's a possibility, I don't know, I could be wrong, with the upcoming election in 2024, with the new administration and a new Secretary of Education, it could change. So we could see a change and have to adopt a new curriculum perhaps in 2 years or 3 years, so.
I think really two more. I guess it was page 5, the language of the guarantee with the equity issue. I get caught up with this a little bit. I don't know how we guarantee anything in this life. And I wonder, I mean, is this a guarantee? Is this a requirement? How would you rephrase that
Sure.
for a layman?
Yeah, we often, we work a lot with Solution Tree around professional learning communities and professional learning teams, and they often use the word essential standard. You'll also hear them called big rocks. People have a variety of names. Priority standards is another one you'll hear. We intentionally selected the word guaranteed in Yakima because we wanted our staff to really understand we're guaranteeing that this is what we're going to focus on. This is what your student is going to be learning in second grade in language arts, for example. So we've very intentionally chosen that. The guarantee is really that we are utilizing the adopted materials that we've invested in. The guarantee is that the emphasis will be on those standards that our teams across the district together collaboratively said this is the most important things for our students to learn and be successful, and there were a number of metrics that they utilized to make that decision. And the guarantee is also that should your family need to move for any reason and you have to change schools, when you arrive, you're not going to miss something really critical. When we don't have a guaranteed and viable curriculum across the system, and we sort of leave it up to every building or every teaching team or every teacher, one teacher may say, it's really important, I'm going to teach fractions in October. And another teacher at another building says, well, I don't think kids are ready, so we're going to do it in January. And that student who attends school B in January, let's say in December they move to school A, they never learn fractions. And that will plague them as a math student all the way through until they graduate and beyond. So the guarantee is that regardless of where you live in our district, this is what we're focused on. This is what we're working towards for your students. And truly, I do hope that our staff own it as a guarantee that no matter what, we're going to do everything we can in our power to ensure students learn and are able to do that by the end of that grade level course or year.
So if I supplanted the word uniformity, uniform across the board from building to building, would that be similar to what you're talking about?
It would be close, but when we think about uniformity, I think sometimes we think every teacher on the same page, on the same lesson, on the same day. And that's not necessarily the case. That's where the art of teaching comes in. What the guarantee is the standards, the outcome measures, so for example, like an end-of-unit assessment that would be in common across our district, and the general timeline for when that is taught in the school, again, to ensure that our students, no matter where they are going to get those critical learnings.
Thank you. I think the last thing is, I'll echo Director Villanueva. I really appreciate the information. I know the process is long and laborious, and there's a lot of hours that go into it, and I really do appreciate that it was very professionally done from start to finish. My only wish is that we had parent voice involved. And I know that's difficult to get parents involved, but I cannot believe that out of a district of 15,000 students that we couldn't find parents to be represented on these committees and have their voices involved as well. Lacking that, I'm wondering if there's a way, I don't suppose there is, but if there was any way to even know of the staff and educators that were involved in the committees, can we get an inkling and an idea of how many of them might be parents in the district or in any other district, just to have some sort of a connection for our community to know that parent voice was involved.
Yeah, we do actually have that data, so we could get that publicized. We know if they're parents in our district, we would just need to ask those folks if they're parents in a neighboring district.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions from the board? I had a couple questions too, and I think you may have answered one of them. The question as I wrote it was when you encountered difficulties in the pacing, and I think you talked about the guaranteed things, because my question was, have you assigned priorities so that if we can't cover it all, are there shared priorities among the districts? So that was my one question. I think that was answered. The other one was, you did mention in there that there were open houses offered for parents at the schools. What kind of participation did you get in those open houses? Did we have parents come?
We did not have a significant number of folks that attended. We did have people attend each one that was offered, and it was offered a couple of evenings for both the elementary and then different evenings for the secondary materials.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, thanks, Dr. Rodriguez. Moving on, we have, and my screen just disappeared, calendar updates and future agenda topics. Just a couple reminders. I think Deputy Superintendent Locke has a flyer about the family back-to-school event coming up August 5th.
Yes, thank you, President Walker. So Barb has sent you all an invite to the back-to-school second annual event that will be at Franklin Middle School on Saturday, August 5th from 5 to 7:30. It's a family event to invite all parents and students for resources, workshops, and food, and then backpacks for the first 500 students. So when you see that on there, I think that's the only new bullet item that you have on your calendar.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just another reminder, our board retreat is on August 14th from 8:30 to 4:30, and you've been presented with a sample agenda. We've not had a lot of feedback on that, so I think it's pretty well set. We're going to go with the agenda we've sent you. Looking forward to that.
President Walker, I think they may have missed, is that sent to us via email?
Yes.
How long, like recently, or is it a little while ago? I'll have to look for that.
It was a little while ago.
Okay. I'll ask Barbara to resend it.
Yeah. Well, we'll send out another.
Okay, I think that would be helpful. Maybe I just don't remember, as it was a little while ago.
We will.
Okay. Summer brain.
We meet again on August 7th with Barb and the superintendent, so we will finalize that for sure, and then it'll come out again on the 7th.
Thank you.
For sure. And then we have a district kickoff event on August 21st. Dr. Rodriguez, want to fill us in on that?
Sure. This is similar to what we did last year. And we do have Dr. Luis Cruz, who's coming back to do the keynote again. So I think a few of you got to hear him last year. He's really a very engaging speaker. We also will have a benefits fair and community resource fair for our staff. What's new this year is we're actually going to bus staff from Ike and Davis. So you can park your car at Ike or Davis and catch the school bus shuttle over to the convention center, where parking is at a premium. And then we have the benefits fair. We'll have the keynote address approximately 9:45 in the morning, and then there's shuttle buses to take you back to the parking lot. So we would love to have any or all of you that are able to attend, if you would let Deputy Superintendent Locke know, and then we'll get you squared away.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a quick question. How long is that, not the benefits fair, but the opening session intended
The
to
keynote
last?
is about 90 minutes.
Okay, thank you. You said 9:45? Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then again, the first day of school is August 22nd. It's amazing. Here we are. Time flies when you're having fun. Okay, well, we can't open school unless we know how we're doing financially. So next up, we have Mr. Cooper with our monthly financial update. And then later on the agenda, we will have some discussion about future budget concerns. So,
Thank you, President Walker. And then would be remiss, thank you for having me up at the big table. It's my first official meeting, so I do appreciate that. And then, Dr. Rodriguez, I'm always impressed by your meticulous and nature when you go through the curriculum adoptions. And we went to an admin retreat at the end of the year, and it blew me away how, I will say, business-like from having an MBA, how you approach it so pedantically in a good way, and how it's so thoughtful. And it blows my mind. The curriculum adoptions have come a long way since I first started looking at them from the outside in. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. This evening, I have 3 or 4 items before you. So this is the monthly financial report. Later in the agenda, there will be the public hearing on the preliminary budget for 2023-24. As is customary, I'll provide you some highlights of your current financial position in the month of June. What we've been watching, of course, month after month is the budget to actual and enrollment. So the budget was $15,433. The actual right now, which is the annual average, we had our last enrollment count in June, so that's the final numbers for fiscal year 22-23. And I said a slight difference of 142, or just under 1%, or 90 basis points on the difference between budget and actual. But as you can see, that does set the tone and trajectory for upcoming enrollment projections, as we have lost enrollment throughout the year and have continued to lose enrollment, which we'll go into some detail upon later. Wow. That slide is tough for me to see because much of it's gone. So that slide is your actual, that's your enrollment trend, sorry, but there's no, and it's not showing up very well on the screen. Apologies for that. Wow. Not sure what's going on with the slide deck. This is the budget versus actual for enrollment. This is the graphical representation of what we talked about earlier. Here's something important that I would always like you to focus on. You've heard me say meeting after meeting that cash is king, but it is very important because it drives your fund balance, and it's part of your liquidity, and then also you have, as a board, financial milestones such as how much you set aside in fund balance. So all year we've been chasing the cash figuring, and as you can see, we're getting closer and closer. So that gap in the spring, after we pushed $5 million over to fund the big chunk of the Davis Auditorium, you can see that gap is narrowing, and now we're about $4 million between the projected and actual. I believe by year end we'll be right around 30 million in cash. Of course, that'll be timing of some large purchases. So one thing I am watching is Dr. Rodriguez's curriculum adoption. It's a $5 million swing, and it requires reimbursement. We may be able to get that in a single month, but if not, then we'll have an accrual. It'll be in your fund balance, but it won't be in your cash balance. So in accounting terms, that'll be a year-end thing. But so if you do see a cash anomaly in August, it will be because that $5.5 million, the timing of that purchase and the reimbursement inbound. So that's one of the few things left on the cash side that I'm still working on with staff, and then Dr. Rodriguez and I met today just to make sure we had all our year-end grants lined up for claim, which is always important when you have the amount of federal money that Yakima has under its care. So any questions on cash? I know it is something that I always like as a board. If you ask me a few slides you want to look at my presentation monthly that keep you up at night, you should always be looking at your cash balance, because it is a very good indication of your financial position at any given time throughout the year. Wow, that is a real tough one. My slides, okay, back to ESSER 3. So ESSER 3, as we talked about, and I've talked about, so ESSER 1 and 2 are fully expended. ESSER 3, as you can see, we have a very large encumbrance of $8.6 million. That is the early learning, the expansion and completion of the Early Learning Center, or Discovery Lab. Discovery Early Learning, sorry, the exact way to call it. And then we only have a small amount left, $524,000 of that approximately $41 million. That money right there is being kept as we have some proposals and some transactions kind of flowing their way through the system, so we want to make sure we have enough slightly in reserve to cover anything we're unaware of as it clears through. ESSER 3, but the 20%, as we talked about, that is the 80% on the first slide. The 20%, which is the curriculum learning loss component, as you can see, that encumbrance of just under $5.5 million. That's for the curriculum, the K-12 English Language Arts that Dr. Rodriguez just explained to you, and then we still have a balance of $2.2 million in ESSER recovery. Any questions on the monthly? I don't know how to get out of this PowerPoint. Are you driving this?
Any questions from the board?
It's driving itself. Okay. Any questions on the monthly financial report? Because we are going to go and have a lot more financial fun here shortly.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one comment. I think
Yes,
it's
sir.
really, having heard of things that have occurred in other districts, it was really smart of our district to use that ESSER money for facilities and materials and curriculum and not for personnel, because what those districts are finding now that invested in personnel with ESSER money, it's gone. And so now they're scrambling to find ways to keep that personnel. So we are not in that position, and that's good that our personnel situation is healthy. Thank you.
President Walker, appreciate it.
Okay, moving on. This is our first opportunity for comment from the public. Is there anyone signed up to comment on agenda items? Okay, moving on, we have consent agenda. There are several items on the consent agenda. Approval of minutes from the June meetings, notification of approval of warrants, approval of personnel actions, and budget status reports for June. Is there any need to remove any of those items from the consent agenda for further discussion? Do I hear a motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda as printed.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, Liz, would you take the roll, please?
Director Beckett,
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.,
Aye.
Director Rice,
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva,
Aye.
President Walker.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have a number of approvals. These are kind of standard things that we often deal with, so shouldn't be a lot of questions about these. But we'll start with Deputy Superintendent Locke. Approval for Superintendent Green to travel for the National Principal of the Year Selection Committee.
Thank you, President Walker. So we're requesting that the Board of Directors approves Superintendent Green's travel to Washington, D.C. To judge the National Principal of the Year program, August 16th and 17th of 2023. He is actually the sole panelist from the region outside of the East Coast. He's the only one on the West Coast headed over there. There's a little to none fiscal impact, as his travel will come from the superintendent budget, as well as the National Principal of the Year program paying for travel costs, including airfare and hotel. There may be minimal expense with fees estimated to be well under $500.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion?
I move that the board approve Dr. Green's travel to the National Principal of the Year selection in Washington, D.C. on August, what did you say, 17th and 18th? 16th and 17th.
Yeah.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve travel for Dr. Green in August. Any other question or discussion? Okay, Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett,
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.,
Aye.
Director Rice,
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva,
Aye.
President Walker.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Next up, we have approval to purchase student laptops for replacement cycle for the price of $959,950.90. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you for that. So this evening before you for action is the approval of almost $1 million in laptops. Andy Gonzalez is here as well for any technical questions. The basic nuts and bolts of what's before you is we have E-rate in the amount of about 30% or 70% of the cost of this purchase, and then local funds for the other 30. So as you can see on the board letter before you, it's approximately a 70-30 split, 700,000 and then 200,000 and change. And so this is how we will have sufficient laptops to keep our one-to-one initiative moving forward. And then, of course, we need them in the classrooms as school begins. So this is a very standard purchase that we've made several times, but we wanted to make sure you knew that we were leveraging our E-rate funds for the most part on this purchase, but do have our in-kind contribution. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Any questions from the board?
How many machines?
Andy? How many laptops were going to be in this purchase? I forget, actually.
I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,800. I will get that information to you specifically and email it to you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, do I hear a motion?
I move that the board grant approval to purchase replacement student laptops on a recognized interlocal agreement contract from Dell for the amount of $950,950.90.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve student laptop purchase. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mr. Murrieta, and we have a coaches agreement to approve. Your mic's not on.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
There you go.
So, bargaining with the Yakima Coaches Association and activities has completed, resulting in a 3-year agreement, and this would include years 2022 through 2025. The fiscal impact is $170,398 from the 2021-2022 school year, to be determined by the legislature for IPD in the following years. This contract expired in 2014. It has continued to be expired every year since then. And when I came into the district, it was being handled by our previous director. And I took over after the first year, and it has literally taken 3 years to get this agreement together. I can give you as much detail as you'd like about the reasons or the consequences why. Sports is a very complicated issue due to a decision that came out several years back called the Castle Rock, which just basically makes the commonality between coaches being one agreement when most of the coaches also happen to be other employees of the district. And Castle Rock basically separated them out and said, even though you're already existing in one agreement, there have to be some separation. And it literally got to the point to where we invited PERC to come and work with us, the umbrella organization, WEA, the coaches, YEA, and the district's HR team in order to properly separate out the individuals that needed to be in the correct agreements and make sure that everything met the legal standard as adopted by PERC. So apologize for something taking so very long, but we finally have an agreement that I think has revamped the entire agreement and now has made it so where I think we'll be able to get future agreements in a relatively expeditious fashion. This agreement does align with goal number 2 of our compass, and I would like to thank Stephanie Arnold, who was our previous Director of HR, along with Kim Newell and Olivia Martinez, and from the Yakima Principals Association, Coach Phil English, Chris Baum, and Laurel Kirschmatter. Any questions?
Okay.
I have a question. In the fiscal impact, it identifies 170,000 and change from the 21-22 school year.
Correct.
That's not a typo.
That is not a typo. So what has happened over the course of the last years is that there would be individual MOUs that would be signed in order to give somebody a raise during that period, and they continued to bargain in good faith as they moved on. So when this came together, we had put together the impact from 2021, and then again, IPD makes the difference moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question also. In the past, when we've seen contracts expire, when there's a new contract in place, that generally has gone back to the expiration date, so that way there is no gap. Can you talk through why we're not seeing that here?
Yes, and I think it really has to do with the individual MOUs that were put in place in order to make some form of an adjustment on a year-by-year basis under the law. So as a school district, we almost look at all of our contracts as teachers who are certificated. Coaches are actually a classified agreement, but the Department of Labor views coaching as an extension of teaching. And so again, the labor laws which coordinate between the different agreements can get confusing at times. When in the state of Washington, when a public contract expires and is gone beyond a year, by law, as long as you are continuing to bargain in good faith, you continue to follow the status quo. Well, when we're talking about a contract that has expired as far back as 2014, I don't believe there's any way people would have continued to work had their wages not been adjusted along the way. So at some point in time, there were these individual adjustments. Part of this agreement itself picks up where I came in and started doing the bargaining for the 21-22 school year. So the retro would go back as far as that point in time and then move forward each year tied to the IPD, which is the inflation
Implicit price deflator.
Implicit price deflator, which is another word of saying COLA. It's unique to the state of Washington.
Does that mean that through these memos that maybe were not formal agreements, that there was something in place, maybe not the formal contract, but are you saying that there was something in place that kind of kept things going until, until this time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion?
I move that the board approve the agreement between the Yakima Coaches Association, Yakima Coaches and Activities Association and the Yakima School District.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the coaches' agreement. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to thank Anthony for bringing this current. He and his team and the list of 3 folks here who I think is, they're part of the Coaches Association, right?
Yes.
Okay, because this says principals. I think it's just a copy and paste issue. But it's nice to know that we have folks on board now that can bring things like this to current status. So thank you to you and your team, as well as the Coaches Association folks.
Thank you.
And again, I'd like to comment too, I really love these 3-year agreements. It really saves a lot of time and effort down the road, and that will also apply to the Principals Association agreement coming up. So that's really nice to have that keep occurring and keeps things more stable over time. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any other comments? Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett,
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.,
Aye.
Director Rice,
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva,
Aye.
President Walker.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Next up, we have the approval of the Yakima Principals Association agreement, and again, Mr. Murrieta.
Thank you. The requested action is that the Board of Directors approves the agreement between the Yakima Principals Association and the Yakima School District. This aligns with goal number 2 of our strategic plan. The fiscal impact is it increases by $362,457 from the 2022-2023 school year to be determined by the legislature for IPD in the following years. Bargaining with the Yakima Principals Association has completed, resulting in a 3-year agreement, and this would include the 2023 through 2026 school years. The 2023-24 increased base wage according to market adjustment in IPD 3.7%. Year 2024-2025 is the IPD to be determined by the legislature, and in the 3rd year of the agreement, 2025-2026 increase based on IPD or 1%. The membership of Yakima Principals Association voted on June 29, 2023 to ratify the collective bargaining agreement as amended through the tentative agreements reached between the 2 bargaining teams. The district bargaining team is now seeking approval of the Board of Directors. I would like to thank the Yakima Principals Association, Bill Hilton, Aaron Thomas, Tori Brennan, John Gonzalez, Eric Diner, and Hector Camacho, and the district's team of Kim Newell, Rob Darling, Jay Cooper, Elizabeth Gonzalez, and Olivia Martinez.
Any questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion?
I move that the board approve the agreement between the Yakima Principals Association and the Yakima School District.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the Principal Association agreement. Any questions or comments at this time? Would you call the roll, please, Liz?
Director Beckett,
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.,
Aye.
Director Rice,
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva,
Aye.
President Walker.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
I just want to again thank the district bargaining team and those folks who represented the Principals Association in getting to an agreement. It's nice that we have, as you said, another 3-year agreement that is on the books.
Maybe in the future we can push for 5.
Legislature lets us go for 6.
Okay, moving on. We need to approve a pay contract extension to Kinderhofen Partners LLC in the amount of $200,000 for nursing staff to support students with special medical needs. Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Board President Walker, members of the board. This is similar to other pay extensions I have brought you previously to support our students with disabilities and in meeting our legal obligation under their individualized education plans or IEPs. We had more services needed in nursing than what we had anticipated in the fall. And in addition, we wanted to be sure that we could provide summer programming for many of our students who have those individualized plans, which did require additional days of nursing support. So all in, to finish out the 22-23 school year, which includes summer programming, it was an additional $200,000 for nursing staff, bringing that contract partnership with Kinderhofen from $500,000 to $700,000. happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board? I'm just curious, the demographics of about how many students are we serving with what you would say is severe medical needs? I'd be curious.
I'd be happy to get you the exact numbers if you would
Okay.
like.
So I have a question, not so much about this contract in particular, but as these kinds of contracts have come to us several times in our frequent, how do we assess the quality of service that these vendors, these third-party contractors provide to our students?
Executive Director Nancy Smith, who is sitting right over there, and her team. We have 3 directors that work with Nancy as well in our special education services team. And they go out, they observe, they look at the quality of, sometimes there's often reporting, so they're checking the reporting as well. And of course, they interact with a lot of our families and our students to see how those services are going. And Executive Director Smith has not been shy when she feels like something isn't up to par for our students about seeking different partnerships. So she's working really hard to build sustainable staffing. We would always prefer to employ people in these needed areas rather than have to contract out where it often costs us considerably more and they aren't a member of the Yakima School District. So she has been working really diligently over this first year in her position to start building programs where we anticipate you'll see less and less of these contracts over time.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion?
I move that the board approve the payment of contract extension to Kinderhoff & Partners LLC for the 22-23 school year in the amount of $200,000 for nursing staff to support students with special medical needs.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the extended contract for Kinderhoff & Partners. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, don't go away, Dr. Rodriguez. Next up, we have a minor adjustment to the calendar we've already approved for next year. And I think it involves Treaty Day is moved from a Monday to a Friday. Okay, would you care to elaborate?
Yes, just briefly, Board President Walker. So my apologies, this was my error in bringing it to you with the Monday. I have learned, Treaty Day is a new learning for me, that it does not fall on a specific day. It's one of those holidays that falls on a specific day of the week. So Treaty Day, for my own learning and anyone else who didn't know this, is always the Friday prior to Treaty Days, the weekend of Treaty Days. So on our original calendar that you approved much earlier this year, we had it designated as a no school day on the Monday. The new calendar just moves it to the Friday. That's the only substantive change. We did take the opportunity to call out early release days and fix some formatting since we had to bring it back to you anyway. I would want you to know our communications department under the leadership of Kirsten Fitterer already has plans to make sure that we get this information out to everybody. And it would be updated in our printed district calendars. If you remember those from last year, we have those coming out again this fall for families, everyone who lives within our boundary, and for staff and for you as board members as well. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Do I hear a motion?
I move that the board approve the 23-24 revised school calendar.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the revised school calendar for 23-24. Any questions at this time? Okay, Liz, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. Next up, we have round 2 with Mr. Cooper. This is by law, we have to have a public hearing on the presentation of a proposed budget. So I will gavel in a legal hearing. The hearing is now open.
Thank you, President Walker. I will say that as the ESSER has cleared its way through the system, we are facing a transitional year in finances in 2023-24. As I go into this report, first off, I want to say this is required by statute, this public hearing. There's no action before the board this evening, just you to kind of digest this presentation, and then by law, you're required to take action prior to August 31st to set your appropriation level as a Class 1 school district. So you will have to take action on a budget between now and August 31st to be compliant with state law. Just thought I'd throw it in there. Additionally, this public hearing was advertised per law twice in our paper of record, both on July 9th and the 16th of this year. And so that is also a requirement for the public hearing, that it be advertised in our paper of record twice in advance. So all those procedural things have been completed. And so now we shall begin. Before I really begin the presentation, I would be remiss, my right and left hand, I guess that means I have no hands, are sitting in the audience, Mona Dennis and Susan Fate, my eyes and ears in the finance department. And then the budget process is a team process, and Dr. Rodriguez and I, along with many HR staff, particularly Chris Miller and Kim Newell, we had the opportunity this year to rebuild our staffing systems, which took a lot of work, but also it will become extraordinarily worthwhile from both a budgetary and an overall organizational standpoint, as we are now have better controls over our staffing, and we are moving to a more ratio-based system than we've historically been. So those are all positive things, but they needed to be completed. So year one of my tenure here was, along with Dr. Rodriguez, was reworking the entire staffing system and putting the internal controls in place. And so we've effectively done that, which is good, because the budget I'm going to show you, as I've talked about, is in a deficit position, which we'll get into. First slide on the deck is this is a snapshot of all of the funds. So just for listening audience and the board of directors, governmental accounting and school district accounting requires that we have funds. And so each fund is a bucket, for lack of a better description. The general fund is the fund that can do anything and everything under state law. It can buy capital projects, it can buy a school bus. So it is your general fund, your operating fund. Your ASB fund, your associated student body, that of course is all the kid money. Every little fundraiser, activity, etc., that's all bound up into the ASB fund. Debt service fund, for lack of better description, is basically your mortgage. So that is your principal and interest on any outstanding debt. So we talk about Eisenhower and Davis and the rebuild and or remodel of both of those. We are still repaying the bond and the debt on those, and so that's what you're seeing there is basically your mortgage or your principal and interest on your outstanding debt. Our capital projects fund here, after the Davis Auditorium and the Early Learning Center move through the books, we will have a very small amount of capital project funding left, and for the most part, a big portion of that is actually in YV Tech, or it's YV Tech funding. So they have capital money as well. That is included in those remaining capital projects funds. The transportation vehicle fund is only for the purchase or major rebuild of school buses, nothing else. You cannot buy or labor hours out of that fund. It is for strictly the purchase or major rebuild or repair, in some cases, of our school buses. We get funding from the state based on depreciation, so we front fund the bus. So we buy it, let's say a bus for $100,000. Then the state repays that over a 12 to 13-year cycle, depending upon what type of bus is. And of course, the legislature during the global financial crisis decided they were going to give us the sales tax at the end. So we used to get it portioned out evenly, but now they're like, you know what, we're going to give you the sales tax in year 13. So if a bus is $200,000, you can see at 8 or 10%, that money is again further out. What I want you to notice on the snapshot, though, is the beginning fund balance is the top line, which is where you're going to begin. So your 9/1 the fiscal year runs from 9/1 to 8/31. We will begin in fund balance. General fund of the most importance. Of course, all funds are important, but general fund being your operating fund is the most important. So what I am putting forward in the budget before you is basically a beginning balance of 30 million. You can see we only have revenues of 291 million, but total expenditures budgeted this cycle of 305, or just under 306 million, 3055. That transfer to other funds is the amount we transfer every year to our non-voted debt, which was undertaken well before I was on the scene. So that's been in place for many, many years, and I believe that is getting close to being repaid. If I recall. In the end, though, your budgeted operating deficit is 14.4 million, effectively cutting our reserves in half in a single year. That's why I said this is a year of transition. Our reserves are meant for situations like this. Our job now is, once this budget is moved forward, is then throughout the next fiscal year, and I don't want to talk about solutions to our financial issues because we're just talking about the budget itself currently. Solutions will definitely come later. But the takeaway is we are beginning the year with about $30 million of cash equivalents. This is a deficit budget and will spend down about half of our reserves, leaving us with about 15 million, 15.5 million. Yes, ma'am. So as I was discussing prior to that little technical issue, is that effectively the budget before you in the general fund will be spending approximately half of your reserve balance in a single year, which means the following year we will have to make significant reductions to erase our operating deficit. And you wonder potentially, well, why are we in this position? Well, first off, I want to say Yakima is trailing behind the other districts around the state by a year or two, which is good, which means for the most part, our district has kept its program levels and staffing levels intact, where other districts have had to erode those earlier on. I came from a district, when I left, I cut $25 million when I was going out the door. And the year before that, I cut 15. So we were fortunate in a way is that ESSER allowed us to use one-time money for curriculum and buildings and kind of to fortify our system. And now we are going to have to manage our system downward based on lower enrollment. So pre-pandemic, so again, ESSER was actually fortunate for us, but now we have to come to a place where we realize our ESSER funds, as we've talked about, we do not want to use them for ongoing staffing. They are exhausted for the most part, except for some learning loss. And then you might ask yourself, well, Mr. Cooper, well, how are we here? Why are we spending half of our reserve in one year? Well, that's why I think it's important that we look at the trend and how the district has been able to maintain its program is pretty amazing, both financially and just operationally. So if you look at the peak of our enrollment in 2017-18, we're at 16,233 students. And I only highlight this just to show you why we have to now adjust, or will in the future have to adjust our staffing levels downward based on our enrollment. You can see that in 17-18, which is that yellow stripe, that we have 16,233 FTE and 1,074 CERT staff and 685.15 classified. And as you go down, you can see our enrollment has declined, but our staffing levels have either grown and they have grown. So the snapshot is, since that yellow strip, the peak of enrollment in 17-18, our enrollment is down 7.7%. Our certificated staffing is up 9.05%, and our classified staffing is up 18.18, or almost 20 basis points. So the position we find ourselves in is now we have to, going forward, our staffing levels need to match our enrollment. And it is nothing more complicated than that. Simply put, we have had a loss of 1,000 students between 17-18 and 23-24. I don't know, less than that, sorry. That's about $17 million. Right now, if you add in state, local, and federal, each student brings about 17,000 and a little bit. And so 1,000 students is approximately $17 million. So I have talked about our enrollment decline. It is common both in the state and across the nation, partly due to birth rate, partly due to educational decisions made during COVID. There's still some hangover locally and nationally on that. And then demographics they've changed. Our housing situation in Yakima, we're fairly landlocked. So any additional development would have to come with either redevelopment of existing parcels or some changes in our housing mix, which either could be more multifamily or maybe multifamily with larger bedroom counts or smaller bedroom counts, depends. That would drive students one way or the other. But the reality is that our enrollment has been in decline, steady decline for since 2017-18, so for a lengthy period. Are there any questions on that? Because that is simplistically that slide. I know it looks rather tame, but it does tell the story of why we are where we are, is that we have not adjusted our staffing levels downward based on our decline in enrollment. And feel free to ask questions, board, throughout, or whenever you're comfortable. If you would like to stop me, then I'm more than happy to take questions off the cuff as well. So that slide was eye-opening as I trended it forward, and it clearly shows our staffing levels are in excess of what our enrollment can carry. So,
I guess the question that comes to mind is why we've continued to add staff when we've known that our student enrollment has continued to decline for a number of years.
I think I believe that this, well, more than I believe, the strategy has been to maintain as much robust programming as possible. In some of those numbers, there have been changes to the state funding formula. So small amounts you could distribute to K-3 class size. That's one where you would see some certificated. Some increases in classified based on social emotional. But so the state incentivizes us to add some staff, but not to the levels that we have continued to be at. So I believe the strategy has been able to maintain program and service to the highest levels possible for as long as possible. And then now we've hit that point where we need to adjust. So 23-24 will be the last year at this current programming level. And so I think that is the strategy really, Raciel, is to maintain services as long as possible. And then you use, as a CFO, I use fund balance to then transition us, because reducing budgets of this size is going to require a lot of conversation and a lot of hard work. And it is. I'm not going to trying to hide the ball by any. It is. I have done it. It is not fun. It does make you quickly reprioritize and prioritize your system in a very rapid way. So it's not all bad. But to that end, our strategy has been to maintain program as robust as possible for as long as possible, and then pivot as we plan to do in 23-24.
Would you say that from 685 staff in 2017-18 to 809 staff in this current, or projected in this next fiscal school year, how many of those staff members are adds to staff versus maybe we're doing a better job at retention and we're not turning over, or we're doing a better job at recruiting and filling existing budgeted positions? Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm trying to figure out how I want to answer that question. I think a bit of both. So I think human resources and teaching and learning have done a lot better job. And this is me coming in kind of cold for the review. A lot better job of getting people hired in the right places at the right time and having less positions open and sitting there. So part of it is what you're seeing is efficiency.
Do you have a vacancy rate over this time period?
No, I could get that for you though.
So one of the things that this information gives us today is that we're not in the situation yet. But as we move on through this current year, if there were no changes whatsoever, this is where I believe Jake's saying that we're going to end up. What that has allowed us to do is before we backfill any position which is vacated either through retirement or a person choosing to move on, is choose to replace those positions through attrition and see what economic impact that will have on us moving forward. So if we were to take this snapshot today and there were 0 changes, I think what you would see is what Jake's projecting. But this also gives us a year advance notice on being able to slowly make those adjustments so that our staff and our students don't feel it all in one fell swoop. What I could tell you is that during the last month, we have had 4 custodial positions that people have either promoted up or have vacated. And what's going to end up happening is if a person is a lead, then we have to fill that position. It's just vital to the cleanliness of the entire building. But what's going to end up happening is it's going to have a domino effect. And then ultimately, when we would post for an unassigned position, we will reevaluate, look at that, and then say, now's not the time to do it. So it's going to result in 4 positions that will be vacated and not backfilled at this particular time. And so that in itself is going to provide a cost savings, and we will do that with every position. And we have put some safeguards together where we'll look at every single position and say, as a cabinet level, do we need to fill this position now, or what is the timing that we do need to fill it? As Jake stated, if there is something that is regarding special education or a high need student, we're going to fill the position. That isn't really a question. If there is a position where we can look to make adjustments, then that's something that we would do. One of the things that I'm doing with businesses, with the maintenance department and the Yakima Association of Building Services, is in the private sector, we would analyze overtime versus a new employee, where in the district, we primarily try to just work straight time, add 40 hours, and then your week is over. There's usually a sweet spot between 12 and 17% of overtime, which allows a person to work additional hours. Yes, it costs us more money at time and a half, but by not hiring an additional person, you're saving on vacation, sick leave, and other ancillary benefits. So you gotta, one of the things that we could do in the non-teaching areas is look to see where that sweet spot is and make business-like adjustments. And it may sound like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but sometimes you actually spend a little bit of money to save a lot more. And so we will look at everything during the course of this year, and we will work as Deputy Locke over there has put together an enterprise thought process where we meet bi-monthly, and as an initiative comes forward, all the directors of every support department will then say, what's the impact to us? How will this decision impact our department, and how can we interact with the other departments to put the best outcome for students? And so knowing that we have a whole year ahead to look forward to this, you're not going to see $15 or $14.4 million short. You're going to see a different number. And then as we move forward that following year, that's when we're going to enter that same proposed deficit or what that number would be, and we'll adjust again. So
is there an opportunity? So I acknowledge you said that we're not here to talk about solutions. It's hard not to.
I know it is.
It's the $15 million deficit budget is pretty significant, and it wipes out the cushion we had above the fund balance that, the 4 or 5%. Yeah, that's in policy, and it took us years to build that up. I'm looking over at Martha to, give an indication of how long it took us to build that up. And that feels really uncomfortable because once that's gone, and that means really severe cuts in the next year, and that's just really uncomfortable. And so I imagine the district knows what its turnover is, and so Superintendent Moody, I thought what you just described is there a way to forecast and set some anticipated goals that could be worked into the budget? So maybe it's not a $15 million deficit budget, maybe it's a half that amount or something like that, because that's turnover generally doesn't swing significantly year to year, and so that's maybe a stable enough number that you can look at by department. And I'm getting in the weeds here, but $15 million is a lot of money. So that's
I think the difficulty is when we look at our turnover numbers, usually we look at them by year end.
Mhm.
So you don't have teachers significantly turn in the middle of the year. You have them turn at the end of the contract cycle when they're making alternative employment decisions. So we really save money on the classified. Where you save money mid-year is classified staffing. That is where you save. That's where you would save money. The turnover numbers, we are roughly our turnover numbers are just under 10%.
10%.
For total turn. But it's not turnover similar in some industries where it's consistent month to month. Our turnover is like a bell curve. You get it on the end, each end. You don't get a lot of turnover, particularly on cert staff in the middle. You can downsize legally. You could downsize classified staff at almost any time of the year. Obviously, there's certain times that are better than others, but for the most part, when you look about turnover, that's why we budget school districts a little bit differently. We can't count on. I would not be comfortable counting on attrition throughout the year to balance the budget. I would rather.
Sure, I
You know what I mean?
understand that.
It is not as-
It could be less of a deficit,
Yes, it could be for sure.
that the board's being asked to approve.
Yes, it definitely could be. I would imagine, giving the stopgap measures that we're already employing, not filling certain positions, slowing the cadence and pace of curriculum adoptions, not stopping them, but slowing, looking at the pace of them. We're going to be better than that 15 million, but that is the picture that right as of today, the math shows me where we would be. So can we claw some of that back? Yes, I believe we can. But throughout the year, there are also unforeseen things that happen to us. Boilers, roofs, those things happen.
And next year, especially when we have to make cuts and there is no wiggle room and having to pay for that boiler that we didn't budget. So,
And the only way to build fund balance back up, unfortunately, means your revenue is in excess of your expenditure. So you have to have a surplus to rebuild your fund balance. Trust me, that fund balance is very important to the CFO for a lot of reasons. And you never have the right amount. It's the Goldilocks of all numbers. Sure. I've heard me say, my labor partners would like me to run 2%. My professional organization wants me to run 16%. Board has a minimum of 5%. Bond rating agencies like 10 to 12.
The professional association says a 16% fund balance would be ideal.
Yeah, the GFOA. But when I say that to people, they're like, no way. In Washington State, that is not possible. The statewide averages last I looked right at 12. It was running 14 during the kind of the ESSER period. It is hard as a large school district to maintain double-digit fund balances in Washington State. It is, and that's why bond rating agencies often downgrade us a notch below other states.
I guess the only other thing I'd say, and maybe this is to you, Superintendent Moody, at the Assistant Superintendent Anthony. Is, I hear what you're saying. There's a balance in weighing overtime versus new staff, and I maybe would just recommend that, we're mindful about employee wellness as well, and how much we're asking staff to do if we are not refilling positions and just kind of allowing attrition to help support that deficit budget. Maybe there's a philosophy statement that we consider as we evaluate positions that we fill or not fill, because employee wellness and burnout, certainly in public education, is at all-time high, and this could make it worse. And so are we shooting ourselves in the foot by doing that? There's not a perfect solution because it is $50 million, but something to be mindful about as we move forward in that process.
Yeah, right now, we're kind of looking at that safety-sensitive, legally required lens, and there's also some positions that are operationally essential. And that's kind of, the superintendent group is prioritizing those now. And that's kind of I would say that's our filter at the moment. That can evolve, obviously. But as those positions come open, as Anthony said, there's some things that they're low hanging, there are opportunities when there's turnover to decide if you're going to fill a position. And so we're going to utilize that rather aggressively throughout the year. Because I'd rather bring you a fund balance when I'm sitting in this chair next July. That's $20 million or $22 million, not 15. So as a CFO, it always makes me nervous as well. But then that's why we do have fund balance, is for years like this. So, and the enrollment decline, as we've talked about, you start in the basement every time you start a budget. So if we're down, 300 kids, that's $4.5 or $5 million before you're even at floor one. And so that gets what becomes difficult is that you're already piling on that deficit before you start. So I'm going to go through this presentation, and sorry, I don't know what is going on with the PowerPoint, but the next graph is the historical student FTE, which was just on the previous slide, but for some reason in this, it does not like to show my numbers. But you can see just before we peaked at 2017-18 and have been in steady decline since then. Now, there is a bright spot in the enrollment, though. Not all doom and gloom. Not on that chart, anyway. Not on that one either. The bright yes, you have it. If you have it before you in soft copy, then you can follow along. But the bright spot for our enrollment, so basic ed enrollment is down. But as you can see, the bar graphs on the far left are your ALE enrollment. And so ALE and online have continued to grow, and then I think now have kind of stabilized, which is very positive. I mean,
for our viewing audience, ALE is
alternative learning experience, right? I always start with the E. I believe it's experience, not education. But yes, that's all, and that encompasses our Open Doors and other online. Our Open Doors is actually on the far right, and that has been maintaining itself kind of at a 70 FTE level. Those are students that otherwise would not likely graduate given that program. So that program, if I want to get in a good mood, I'll call Lois and she'll talk to me about some kids she's working with. And so those programs have been really great for some of our kids that are finding it difficult to graduate. But the bright spot is that COVID did push some kids into online, and that has become a viable alternative for some of our students, which is a good thing. But ALE enrollment is up, and everything else is fairly flat, and then basic ed enrollment is in decline, as we talked about. My deck is gone now. I've got double technical difficulties. All right. So something we like to monitor and watch, particularly importance I know to myself and my colleagues, is the special education to basic ed trend. And our special education numbers are down a little bit as well. But for the most part, we are settling in right at that 14.5% mark of student enrollment. So the graph on the board shows our special education enrollment continuing to decline as our basic ed enrollment does. So that's good to see there's that appropriate ratio, which is important. And for the most part in that program, under Nancy's leadership, they have made great strides in a lot of program areas. So that is one also bright spot for me personally, financially and programmatically, is the work that's been happening in special education. But our friends in the legislature, they never really do us 100% solid. So there was positive movement this biennium, of last year, this biennium, in special education. So 2022-23, the backfill. So that graph has a lot of moving parts, but the percentages are the percentage backfilled by the local levy. And then the green bar is the total cost of the program, and then the orange bar is the funding gap covered by levy, but in dollar terms. So you can see it's dropped because the state did put more money into special education to the tune of a couple $1 million, which lowered the amount that we're having to backfill locally. So last year we were just under 10, so that 9.8 million or 26% of the cost of our special education program was coming out of local levy. This year it's a little better for Yakima. We're at 19% and just under 7.4 million. So there was movement there from the legislature. They increased the multiplier, and they've also been toying with the tiers in the last few years on they are incentivizing more inclusivity in the way they're funding our special education students and disincentivizing our self-contained settings. So you actually get a higher amount for students that are included in more basic ed classes than you would if they were fully self-contained, which is good to move programming that way, but often our self-contained students have a higher cost. So it does run kind of counter there. But again, the legislature did put more money into special education. And so now when we go down to the halls of Olympia, we can say that it's only a 20% backfill. Not.
Before you move on, I just want to make sure I understand how to read the chart. The line in there, that's essentially the orange line divided by the green line. It doesn't align with.
No, it's just to
the
show you the
x-axis.
percentage backfill and the aggregate dollar amount backfill on the same graph, if that makes sense. The
Okay.
line is the percentage backfill out of levy, and then the
And that's the orange divided by the green.
Yep.
Okay.
or what you said the first time. I could have said yes to.
Jake, is federal funding for special ed identified on this chart?
It is not broken out specifically in this chart.
What was your question, Martha? I'm sorry.
If the federal funding for special education,
No, it is not. It's total special education costs and then the amount covered by the local levy, which I back out manually for the chart. But to Director Rice's point, that is another shortfall, as IDEA was meant to fund 40% of a cost of special education, which for us on that slide, I'm not running my slide, sorry. But for example, $40 million is roughly the cost of the special education program for the 23-24 budget. IDEA would be given us 16 million instead of the 8 or 10 we get now. So that is a significant difference. And that battle has been fought for many years at the federal level. And regardless of administration, it doesn't seem to change. It seemed to be kind of just floating along where it's at. But it does exacerbate our local costs when the feds don't step up either.
and the percentage that the federal government provides is, at one point it was up to 17 or 18%, and now it's down to what, 10 maybe?
I think it's at 10 or 12. But I will give you those numbers as well. I can break them out.
Okay, thanks.
But it has definitely not at their 40% required threshold under the federal law.
So in this chart, is the federal funding missing, or is it included in the orange?
The orange is the
That's just the
local levy, and then the green is the total cost of the program, which includes state and federal and local.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So the green would be the denominator
Okay.
in this equation. Sorry, I'm like click. No. Levy revenue, which will be part of our conversation later this evening. Additionally, besides our robust staffing levels, we are also at a levy revenue disadvantage, as we talked about before. We are at the end of a 4-year levy. We are well below our statutory authority because the assessed valuation district grew rapidly, as we talked about, kind of at 17. It was a 30% or 35% swing, I think, over a 2-year period or 3-year period. Sorry. That caused us to be below our levy authority. As you can see in that slide, 3.5 million and then 4 million respectively year over year. So that puts us, that money is allowed to be levied, but are collected, but it's below our approved levy authority. So again, that puts us at a revenue disadvantage, which we'll talk about during our levy election resolution portion of the program. But again, that's another headwind that we face financially, is we also are below our local levy authority, which gives us less resources. LEA as well, local effort assistance. We are down in LEA as well because LEA is local effort assistance is a function of statewide assessed valuation. So as the state assessed valuation grew recently, our LEA numbers dropped. We were almost 700,000 less in LEA this budget than last budget. And that's because that's the way the state formula works. The more our property values rise, the lesser amount of LEA we get. So when our assessed valuation in Yakima grows, we get less LEA. That's what happened. Our assessed valuation grew, so we get less levy equalization funding. There would be that is the fund balance trend if we were to do nothing. So that is the I'm not going to do anything. That's not an option, mind you. But I always like to show you the worst case scenario if we said, you know what, we're just going to let this ride, which I'm not recommending, that would be our fund balance. We would be able to survive fiscally one more year. And then by the end of 24, 25, we would have no fund balance left. The 4-year forecast portion, this is required by statute and relatively new. What we like to do in this, I do not like to assume any board action. So what you see is basically just flat growth across all those numbers, except you can see our fund balance. We talk about going from 30 to 15 in 25, 26. In this run down to 4, but we had it less on the other slide, and then it would be negative. So most districts around the state, if you look at their 4-year, they always trend negative because we trend the revenue lower than the expenditure, because all we have to go by is the OSPI, CPI numbers or numbers. So we all use those to kind of trend. And then for the most part, I don't like to make any assumption about board action. So is the levy, are you going to approve a levy measure? Are you not? Are we going to reduce? Are we not? So I just keep the numbers flat for that, because that's beyond our control and purview. That's in your purview eventually, but for the most part, that slide I would say is legally required. It doesn't provide that much information in year 3 and 4. To be honest, it's more of an exercise that we have to do because things change rapidly. I mean, think about COVID versus non-COVID years and what that did to our finances, or the start of a biennium or the change in administration. So, the 4-year forecast is required. I would put lots of stock in the first 2 years, but then years 3 and 4 are pretty much extrapolation out. There's the 4-year forecast for the other funds, and we didn't touch on ASB, but I want you to know the ASB process is driven at the building level. Students are involved in the creation of each of their building budgets. It's then approved and kind of shepherded by an advisor. And then all that rolls up into our office. So that aggregate number you see actually has a lot of kid and staff work in it, because all of them had to go through their budget making process with their elected officers, et cetera. So it is a lot of work. But our ASB fund, we have them budget as flat as possible, equal to revenue and expenditure. You can see it's stable going forward. Debt service, that will remain flat and predictable unless or if we pass another bond issue or bond measure, then that would change the debt service amounts going forward. But for now, those are locked in based on your current outstanding debt. Capital projects, as we talked about earlier on, there's hardly any capital projects funds left in the capital projects fund itself, as we've expended those down and left the minimum amount required to cover the YV Tech capital portion. Transportation as well, it's basically straight line forward, spending all of our money for them each year if we can, based on bus purchase prices. We will have some swings in the transportation fund as we had that grant award for the electric buses. So we're still waiting for reimbursement on those. So we have some timing issue, but for the most part, it will all wash out in the next few months. Our transportation fund for them is healthy currently, and we're still getting depreciation money from the legislature. Also required by law is our MSOC disclosure. Sorry, I know this is a really beautiful slide for some. So this MSOC stands for Material Supplies and Operating Costs, or it used to be NERCs, non-employee related costs in the old days. We are required to make a disclosure that how are we expending or the MSOC funding coming from the legislature. For the most part, and in most districts, it's a moot point because we all expend greater than the MSOC allocation, which you see here. We expend a significant amount more than the legislature gives us in material, supplies, and operating costs. So the disclosure in part was to make sure the districts were indeed using legislatively appropriated funds for MSOCs, so which we are, and in excess of. So. Nothing would be complete without a SWOT analysis. So not all negative. Because I think deficit budgets, obviously as a CFO, they're not something I like to bring forward to the board of directors, but how you respond to the deficit is a very important thing for the organization. And so I can tell by our conversations that we're already having that there's definitely ideas on how to respond to our current budget deficit. So on the strength side, we do have adequate fund balance to sustain programming in 2023-24. So that is why you have fund balance or savings account, however you'd like to talk about it, is that we are able to maintain program, which allows us that time then this year to plan what our program is going to look like in 24-25. And it will look different than it does now. It would likely have fewer staff. Continuing alignment of resource to strategic plan, always important whenever we're doing the board letters. We're always looking back at the strategic plan, figuring out where it lines up. And so, and then continued collaboration and transparency in the budget development process. Superintendent Green, Assistant Superintendent Rodriguez, and Assistant Superintendent Murrieta have been instrumental in continuing to support that, bringing on more departments into the budget work, and then continuing to work collaboratively as much as possible. Obviously, our weaknesses, continued decline in student enrollment, not healthy. That is not healthy for the financial position of any school district. We are driven by student enrollment and the revenue associated with that. So when that is in decline, your enrollment or your revenue is in decline as well. Inflationary pressures. I know people are like it's running at 3, not 9. It's still at 3%, above the Fed's target rate of 2. And remember, all our prices are rebased now. So the inflation that has occurred over the last 24 to 36 months, that's now baked into everything we buy. And even though there may be a slight price decline, historically, once prices are inflated by inflation, they do not come down to their original levels, unless it's like a commodity. But for the most part, our prices are now rebased at a higher level, which costs us all more. Continued gap in state and federal revenue, special education. We touched upon that quite a bit. Again, that continues to be the Achilles heel of a lot of school districts. How are you going to pay for legally required and very important special education services? We are below our statutory levy authority, so we talked about the revenue loss there. Another headwind. And then, of course, a weakness is a reduction in fund balance by approximately $14.5 million. I agree, Graciela, that is definitely a weakness. Dropping that much fund balance in a single cycle. Opportunities. We continue to implement our YSD staffing allocation models. We have them in place, which means now we can tune those up or down, and that will help us drive staffing through the system in different ways. We have an opportunity to align spending with declining enrollment, which is obviously paramount in what we have to do the next fiscal year. Is our expenditure levels need to match our level of revenue driven by our student enrollment. We have still the opportunity for a future capital levy or bond. I think I'm very optimistic about that, because I do believe a capital measure, a bond or capital levy does take pressure off the operating fund. both in case of emergencies or if we plan to use bond proceeds or capital levy proceeds, for example, to buy technology. That would be another way that would offset costs of the general fund. So those are all opportunities that are still ahead of us. The threats, continued enrollment fluctuations. Again, enrollment patterns have been difficult nationwide and around the state. Continued decline or even fluctuations up or down can be difficult to manage, but for the most part, I believe we're going to stabilize in the next few years. But most enrollment models are rearward looking and linear based, so it's hard to predict your low year, just as hard as it is to predict your peak year. And so every enrollment model I've ever worked with, that is always the most difficult part. Is like, where's your bottom and where's your top? And we'll find out. It's better to project downward and come in above projection, which I was very conservative in enrollment projections. So we could come to the better, but at the same time, with a financial deficit such as this, you also don't want to be overly optimistic in enrollment projections either, because that will hurt you later on. We in Yakima depend upon the general fund for large maintenance projects, which is fortunate that we can do the maintenance projects, and Assistant Superintendent Marietta has pushed a lot of work forward, but that does drain a significant amount of money out of the operating fund when you have to do things that other districts may be doing out of capital proceeds. And so that is a threat for sure. Looming recession, I don't know. We'll see what happens, but it is definitely being talked about, and we have seen things slow. So inflation has slowed. We'll see if economic growth slows after that. The housing market has been interesting, depending upon the region. So that of course, if they go into recession Olympia and it's recession time, then their thought process will change significantly. So something to watch always. And then of course our operating deficit, as we discussed, that would be a threat. I know that was a lot, and some doom and gloom, and some optimism. Hopefully, a lot of reality and transparency. That was the goal. So now the public hearing is open. Is there any questions from the board? Any further questions?
Any questions from the board at this time? Okay, this is also, as a public hearing, we can welcome comments from the public. Are there any questions from the public?
I hate to keep this going because it's so late and I want to get home, but I'm sure everyone else
It's worth asking
does.
if it's late and you want to ask the question. Go for it.
With our relationship with the city, do we have a sense of upcoming housing development? I thought I'd read something out by Costco, although maybe that's Union Gap, but those high school kids would be ours. Is that, does that help offset the enrollment numbers, or?
I don't know. Here's what I've learned over my career. It takes a lot of houses to generate enrollment, more than you think.
Sure.
I haven't run updated generation rates here, but a subdivision or housing development with that would generate a lot of kids may generate 3/4 to 1 per house. So if you have 100 homes, you may get 75 kids out of there. And I'm talking single family, 3 or 4 bedroom. Now the generation rates for multifamily, and Mr. Beckett and I have discussed this, really is depending upon the housing mix. So a 3-bedroom multifamily would obviously have the potential to generate up to usually depends on the demographics, 1/2 to 1. But a historic multifamily it takes sometimes, it generates 0.1 or 0.15, so 10 units for 1 kiddo, depends upon the housing mix. So it is a positive. Is it going to bail us out? No, it's not. It will be a sprinkle of new enrollment, and the reality is it's spread across 13 grade levels. Right? So you will see it, but not significantly. But We are continuing to look at the redevelopment, and I know, do you have any idea of the Costco, or not the Costco, the Fred Meyer? That's the one we're
Powerhouse?
talking about.
Yeah, I'm relatively certain that is in our
That
district
is.
confines. The only thing I was going to add to this, because Jake is right, but the other thing to realize, I mean, personally, I think we're going to see an increase in density as opposed to seeing large single-family subdivisions coming in because of our landlocked nature of our district. But the other thing just to keep in mind is that any project of any size, it takes years to permit and it takes years to construct and
Years to fill?
yeah, and years to, maybe a year to fill. And so it would be far, far down the line as far as making a sizable impact from that perspective.
May I?
Yes.
There are several Western Washington districts facing budget cuts. Muggletail School District has approximately 100 positions due to budget shortfalls, layoffs looming in Snohomish County. Bellingham Public School faces cuts. South Whidbey Island. This is something that is happening statewide. It's not something that is happening just in Yakima. And the thing that I am very encouraged by is having an entire year's notice based on projection that we have to take action before it hits the fan, not wait till it hits it and then try to be reactionary. So I feel very comfortable about the position that we're in. I know it's a very large projection. We faced this 4 years ago when Trevor first came in as assistant superintendent. We made a lot of changes at that point in time, and we find ourselves 4 years later in a much better position than what we were. And I still believe that a year or 2 years from now, you will find us in an even better position than what we're projecting. But by law, he has to produce a snapshot. And at this very moment, this is what that snapshot would look like if we made no changes. We will make adjustments as this year goes on, and I am very confident that you will not see these numbers. He can't tell you that, and I, to be honest with you, I feel very nervous when I'm saying this to you. But-
Yes, you should.
But
Just in case it doesn't happen. I'm teasing you, Anthony.
But a cost of an employee is roughly 40% greater than what their wages are. When we look at taxes, when we look at vacation and retirement and all the other things that are attached to our employees, it may seem like a very large number, but it is something that is doable, and I'm very convinced that we will make adjustments prior to it happening, not just after it happens. So I don't, I don't know how to sound as positive as I would like to be during a report like this, but if there is any good news, it is we have all dealt with something like this before in our prior careers, and we will make the appropriate adjustments.
I would, to echo that, I think managing downward, though, it is definitely not as fun when you have enrollment growth, and it is essential in an obligation we have professionally and personally to manage downward when time calls for it. And I wish there was an easier way to do it, but I have not found one yet in 20 years of doing this work. It is just hard and thoughtful work that has to be done. And so, and Anthony's right. I'm optimistic for the year that we have to move through the process, and thankful that we had fund balance to utilize one time for our deficit. So.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, at this time, I'm going to close the public hearing. Move on to Resolution 9.22.23, Educational Programs and Operations Replacement Levy. And Jake again, and maybe this will be some potential solutions in here.
President Walker, can I request a 5-minute recess?
Yeah. We'll take a 5-minute recess. Okay, we have one more item on our agenda. We have Resolution 9.22.23. Mr. Cooper.
Are we going to go start from the beginning?
Okay, carry on, Jake.
So before you this evening is a resolution created by outside legal counsel for a proposed 4-year EP&O levy request. This proposal initially went through the Levy Advisory Committee, which Director Rice sat at, and unanimously they put forward a recommendation for a full authority request levy, which is what we are bringing to you this evening. And I discussed this, I believe, the last meeting with you briefly. Oh, thank you, Jenny. Briefly. But wanted to go through, if there was any, first off, is there any questions of the resolution? What the resolution does, and if it is approved this evening, the district does not have to file this tomorrow with the county, so we'll likely hold it until it can be signed by Superintendent Green, and then we would decide when to file it with the county. So you don't, given the proposed election date is in February, we do not have to file it tomorrow with the county auditor, so we'll have time to look at it. But for the most part, we are requesting approval and action on a 4-year levy measure at full authority. And on your board documents as well were the resulting tax rates and the anticipated tax rates as an attachment. So you had those to review in advance. And at this point in time, I'll take questions on the resolution if there are any.
Are there any questions for Mr. Cooper?
This is a replacement levy, is that right?
Correct.
What's the tax rate right now?
Current tax rate for 2024 is, the total combined rate, so that's all the outstanding measures, would be $2.98 per thousand.
So this levy would be less than the
This levy
current-
would increase your total combined tax
Increase.
rate to $3.40 per thousand.
Oh, I see.
It's a 40 cent per thousand increase approximately. Our tax rate average the last 10 years has been $4.08 per thousand, and the 5-year average has been $3.45 per thousand the last 5 years. So our tax rate in 2024 dropped because we had a 17% increase in assessed valuation. So keeping up with that assessed valuation, that is one reason our tax rate dropped so significantly. Looking back, our historic tax rates, we've had tax rates in the upper 4s consistently, 475, et cetera, 480. But for the most part, post-McCleary, our tax rate has leveled off to that $3.50 per thousand, which I anticipate it to stay unless we add a measure to it, such as a capital measure or bond. So 40 cents per thousand would be the estimated increase for a full authority levy. And you can see the uptick. The current and last year of the expiring levy has an amount of $16.5 million. The proposed amount in year 2025 is $21.5 million. So that's where we start to make up some of that lost levy revenue. And just for your own edification, if this moves forward and is passed by the electorate, the first year we would only get $2.5 million of the 5. Remember, it's a calendar year levy, so it would take 2 fiscal years to get the full increase. So $2.5 million approximately. It's 47 and 52%, but for the most part, for our conversation, 50-50 is fine. So you only get about $2.5 million in each of those years till you're up to your full authority. So.
And if this passes, how would that impact the budget proposed budget we just saw?
It would positively impact the revenue to the tune of $2.5 million above what I currently have projected.
Okay.
So we will have increased costs in 24-25, just for inflation, if there's an IPD. So the addition, and if a levy was to pass, that would of course take care of a lot of your increased costs and then potentially save program going forward that may have to be reduced otherwise.
Thank you.
Just so that I'm clear, because this time of night things get a little foggy. Year one, so.
Yep.
24, 25, correct?
Calendar year 25, it would be fiscal year 24, 25, because you
Okay.
get your second half of your collection.
So we'd only realize 2.5 million of increase that year. The next year,
The full
since
full
we
five
would
are
have the
rolling.
whole
Yep.
fiscal year to accumulate, credit that money, it would be 4.5, right?
Yes. Correct.
Thank you.
So important recap, this is a proposed levy measure for calendar years 2025 to 2028. Your current levy measure expires December 31st of 2024. And so this selection would be to replace that expiring measure with a replacement levy. Twice. Maybe might be a bit late for me too. For those fiscal years, or for those calendar years, sorry. And the ballot language, or the draft ballot language, is obviously included within this resolution, so whatever the voters are going to see is in your resolution, so the actual proposition language is there for you to review as well. For the most part, this has been reviewed and created with legal counsel and assistance of communications and Superintendent Green, so we hope that language sticks. Are there any other questions?
Just a clarification, I'm looking at the graph. So if I'm looking at the combined rate, we are presenting $1.43 below our high water mark of 2014.
Correct.
Am I reading that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you, Jake.
Part of that is legislative in nature.
Yes, so McCleary lowered our local levy authority to $1.50 per thousand, which you see in, what year was about 50? 2019. And then the district went back up to $2.50 per thousand in 2020. And then after that, assessed valuation has just lowered our rate year after year because it grew greater than was modeled at the time. And I will say local levy revenue is even more important than ever. Obviously, we have a deficit, but we also are declining in LEA. So LEA is decreasing at the same time, so we'll have less local levy revenue on the LEA side if we don't continue to levy our full authority.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Cooper?
I do have just comments. I am concerned with the big increase. I mean, 40 cents. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about, all in one shot. I mean, for the next levy. And then, I'm considering inflation. We have the interest rate where it's at. You talked about a possible recession. McCleary, as we know, is not fully funding education.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're putting the responsibility on our local taxpayers when our state, right, should be paying, and I hate to use the word should, but they should be fully funding education. So and then with the current student performance, it's kind of, I am concerned with this, the 40%, I have to say, and again, putting a lot of the responsibility of our shortcomings, right, of the deficit budget on our local taxpayers when everybody appears to be struggling to make ends meet currently, and we're just going to make that could make it even worse for our community, for our taxpayers. So I just want to make that comment.
I think it's important to remember that this is not an additional levy amount. This is a replacement of what we have asked of the taxpayers for the past 4 or 5 years now. So at one point, as Jake indicated, our ask was much higher, was much larger. It was 308 or 312 or something like that. And now it's only 250 per thousand. So I know it looks like it is a large amount when you look at the final numbers. But I think the important thing is when we're talking with the community to emphasize to them that it is a replacement. It's not new. It's just replacing what we had.
And at the end of the day, it's up to the voters to decide. We're presenting this to the community, and the voters will approve or disapprove as they see fit, so.
Yep, and it's a simple majority measure. Levy is 50% plus 1 vote.
Thank you, folks. Any other questions or comments? Okay, do I hear a motion?
I move that the Board of Directors of the Yakima School District Number 7 adopt Resolution Number 09.22.23 concerning a replacement levy for educational funding.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Resolution 9.22.23. Any further questions or comments? Okay, Liz, call the roll, please.
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva?
Aye.
President Walker?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you for your action on that item, and now, of course, work begins.
Yep. Now we work to get it passed. Okay, we now have arrived at our second opportunity for comment from the public. I have not seen any new people come in the room, so I'm assuming we have no comment from the public. There is no need tonight for executive session. So we have arrived at time to adjourn. I'd like to thank everyone for being patient with a very full agenda tonight. And wish you all a restful week, and see you on the 14th of August for a day of fun.
Are we bringing snacks or?
I think there will be some snacks provided, I believe. On the 14th. During the, yeah. Lunch will be provided by our food services, so. Oh. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Jake.